The Regia Aeronautica, the Italian Air Force, had some of the most interesting aircraft designs in World War II. And in this collection, we have all the videos I have made about these planes so far. So without further ado, let's begin with Chapter 1, the Fiat G.50 fighter. The history of the Fiat fighter reached back to the early 1930s, when the Italian Air Force, just like others around the globe at that time, still used biplanes. The Fiat company supplied many of the aircraft used by the Italians, like the CR-30 and CR-32 designs. But during the 1930s, in just a few years, the aviation technology advanced a lot, and by 1935, the new fast monoplanes started to outperform the conventional biplanes. And just like in other countries, the Italians also realized these new modern designs are the future. Though the Fiat CR-32 only entered service in 1934, already in February 1936, new specifications were issued by the DGCA for a new modern fighter plane to replace the biplanes. The main reason behind the rush to develop new fast monoplane fighters were the new bombers, developed around the mid-1930s, like the Italian Savoia-Marchetti SM.79 or the German Heinkel HE-111. These all made good use of the new advanced aviation technologies and were all much faster than the biplane fighters in use at the time. If you're interested in the history of these bombers, I have already made videos about them. Check them out. You can find the link in the description. The new requirements asked for a low-wing monoplane with a retractable landing gear featuring two 50 caliber machine guns. First, the requirements asked for only one machine gun, but later it was modified to two, a top speed of 500 km an hour, and a climb rate of 6,000 meters in 5 minutes. The new designs also needed to incorporate the Fiat A74 radial engine. This engine was chosen because of a directive issued in 1932, which instructed the Italian manufacturers to concentrate their efforts on air-cooled radial engines, as those were deemed more reliable than the water-cooled inline engines of the time. But as it turned out later, this caused a lot of problems for the Italian Air Force and the aircraft designers. Though these specifications were issued in 1936, the design team at Fiat, with the lead of Giuseppe Gabrielli, was already working on a new monoplane fighter design for almost a year, since April 1935, for an earlier ministry specification. The initial plans were originally drawn up for a fighter/ground attack aircraft, which would have featured a bomb bay and was planned to feature machine guns both in the nose and in the wings. But the new specifications issued in February 1936 now asked for a pure fighter/interceptor design, without the ability to carry bombs, and only two machine guns. So Fiat modified their plans accordingly. The wing-mounted machine guns and the bomb bay were removed, and they entered this new design for the tender in 1936. There were no shortage of other competitors, as most of the aircraft manufacturers in Italy participated with their new designs. Macchi presented their MC200, Aeronautica Ambra entered their AUT-18 design, Caproni their Vizzolo F5, IMAM sent their RO51 proposal, and Reggiane their RE2000. Two prototypes were ordered from the Fiat design, and the first one was finished in early 1937 and made its maiden flight in late February. It was the most modern Italian fighter at that time, with an all-metal construction and featuring a fully retractable undercarriage. During the trials, it managed to reach a top speed of 472 km an hour and climb to 6,000 meters in 6 minutes 40 seconds. Based on this performance, in September the type was ordered into limited production for 45 units. During the test flights, the fighter was found very maneuverable, but it also had some high-speed problems, which raised some serious concerns. Pilots complained about heavy controls at high speeds and serious wing flutter, which actually caused the second prototype to crash, killing its pilot. The design still had to prove itself in a fly-off competition against the very similar Macchi MC.200 before the ministry would authorize large-scale production. Looking at these pictures, we can see the side profile of the two aircraft was very similar, but for instance the wing profiles were very different. The test flights in early 1938 proved the MC.200 to be faster than the G.50, while the Fiat design was more agile and could outturn its rival. Though the MC.200 proved to be superior, and the crash of the second G50 prototype cast a shadow over the Fiat design, the ministry decided not to abandon the G50 line, as they wanted to keep it as a backup in case any unforeseen problems should emerge with the Macchi fighter. Neither did they want to lose all the resources put into the project, as the previously ordered batch of 45 aircraft was already under production. For a while it was actually considered to ask Fiat to manufacture the MC.200, but the retooling would have taken long months, so this plan was abandoned. We can basically say the earlier ordered small batch saved the G50 project from cancellation. In the end, the ministry decided to put both fighters into production in June 1938. Though the new G50 fighters were much better than the earlier biplanes, they had some teething problems. The landing gear malfunctioned several times, the pilots complained about visibility and the low-quality plexiglass on the canopy, which was prone to cracking and scratching. So after the first 45 units, an open cockpit was adopted, together with some additional changes, like oxygen supply for high altitude use, a new starter system, and changes to the landing gear. The first production G50 fighters started to arrive to their units late 1938. The Fiat G50 was 8 meters long with a wingspan of 10.99 meters. It had an empty weight of 1,963 kilograms and a maximum takeoff weight of 2,402 kilograms. The plane was powered by the Fiat A74 air-cooled radial engine, producing 870 horsepower. With this engine it could reach a top speed of 470 km an hour and a cruise speed of 415 km an hour. It had a range of 445 km and a service ceiling of 10,700 meters. The plane's armament consisted of two 12.7mm Breddo machine guns in the engine cowlings. The G50 was the first production variant. 245 units were built. The G50B version was a dual-control training variant, and here the B doesn't mean newer version as with other manufacturers, but it's short for B-Commando. The next G50 bis variant was developed after the project narrowly avoided cancellation, and the ministry told Fiat to improve on the type. However, the flight characteristics on the bis variant were mainly remained the same, and the main changes included extended range with added fuel capacity, a slightly modified fuselage, and a redesigned rudder. 421 were built. The next G50 third version featured a more powerful 1000 horsepower Fiat A76 engine, but the new engine was found to be problematic, resulting in the cancellation of this variant. The G50V version was built after the Italian government acquired a license to build the Daimler DB601 engine. A prototype using the new engine was built in 1941, and though the aircraft showed increased performance with the new engine, reaching 580 km an hour speed, in the end this variant was cancelled when the new G55 variant was introduced, using the Daimler DB605 engine. But we will talk about that fighter in a separate video. The first production G50 fighters started to arrive to the units in late 1938, and their first deployment, similarly to many German aircraft of the era, took place in the Spanish Civil War for operational trials. 12 fighters were sent to Spain in January 1939, and from March they flew bomber escort missions, but they didn't see any real action as the opposing air force was almost non-existent by that time. The type arrived too late to gather any valuable experience, as the Civil War ended in April the same year, and the remaining aircraft were given to the Spanish regime. The Finnish government ordered 35 units of the type in 1939, as part of their rearming program against the likely Soviet attack. Deliveries, however, only started in February 1940, so the type didn't play any significant role in the Winter War. In June 1940, when Italy entered the war, 118 G50s were in service. Though this type was considered a very modern fighter when it appeared, Soon it was outperformed by more modern designs, which were faster and more heavily armed. In September, some of them were deployed in Belgium to help the German forces during the Battle of Britain. But the G.50, with its relatively slow speed and short range, was not effective against the British fighters. The Hurricanes and Spitfires could easily outrun the Italian fighters. The type was used over the Balkans during the campaign against Greece as well, where they clashed with the older Gloucester Gladiators and newer Hurricanes of the RAF. From December 1940, the G.50s also started to arrive to North Africa, again clashing with the British fighters, and their efforts were helped by the arrival of the new G.50 BIS variant, featuring extra fuel tanks and a much bigger operational range. Apart from the usual modifications, like sand filters and oil coolers for this theater, many of the fighters were modified to carry bombs on underwing racks, and used as fighter bombers. The role of the type became less and less significant after 1941, but they still stayed in service until the end of the war, though mostly used in ground attack roles after faster, newer Italian fighters appeared, like the Fiat G.55 and the Macchi MC.205. During the invasion of Sicily and southern Italy, they flew many missions against Allied troops, ships, and landing craft. But by the time of the armistice in September 1943, only a few of them remained operational. At least 24 of these fighters were captured by the Germans after the Italian surrender, and transferred to the Croatian Air Force, where they were used during 1943, but their number slowly decreased. The surviving few planes stayed in use after the war by the Yugoslavian Air Force, and the last G.50 was scrapped in 1956. Though these were the most modern Italian fighters when they were designed, they were quickly overshadowed by newer designs, as they were hampered by the underpowered engine and the weak armament. But they served as a base for the faster G.55 model, which is considered as the best Italian fighter of World War II by many. Chapter 2. The Savoia-Marchetti SM.79 Sparviero. The story of this plane starts in 1934, when Savoia-Marchetti began working on a new transport and passenger aircraft. It was actually not a completely new design, but an evolution of their former planes. The earlier S-73 and S-81 designs were developed in parallel in the early 1930s, and they both made their first flight in 1934. The new SM-79 was heavily based on these earlier designs, initially planned to be a civilian version of the S-81. The design, while it was innovative in many aspects, being a low-wing monoplane with a streamlined, clean fuselage and featuring a partially retractable landing gear, it was actually the first Italian multi-engined aircraft with a retractable undercarriage. But on the other hand, it used a very conventional construction, with a welded tube frame, a wooden wing construction, and it was partially fabric covered. This meant the plane could be built from cheap materials and without the extensive use of machine tools. It used 3 engines, 2 in the wing nacelles and 1 in the nose, but the third engine originally was used for commercial safety standards, not for performance. The prototype used the Piaggio P9 RC40 engines, producing 590 horsepower each, and it made its maiden flight in September 1934. Though it was intended to take part in the London-Melbourne air race, it was finished too late to participate. Though the aircraft showed good performance, it was clear the airframe could be capable much more, but the original engines were too weak and unreliable. Engine failures and one time an engine fire forced the designers to look for an alternative. So in April 1935, the aircraft received new Alfa Romeo 125 RC35 engines, developing 750 horsepower each. With the new engines, the plane could reach 355 km/h speed at sea levels, and in May the same year, set a record time flying from Milan to Rome in just 1 hour and 10 minutes, averaging a speed of 410 km/h. This flight, apart from showing the impressive speed of the plane, was more important for the type in other ways, as it turned out later. At the time, the SM-79 was the fastest multi-engined aircraft in Italy, and it was faster than most fighter planes of the time, so it was just a matter of time before its military applications were discovered. Originally back in 1934, Regia Aeronautica issued a competition for a new medium bomber. They asked for a twin-engined aircraft which could carry 1200 kilograms of bombs with a top speed no less than 385 km an hour and a range of 1000 km. All major Italian manufacturers entered their designs. Fiat with the BR20 and the BGA designs, Caproni their CA135, Piaggio the P32 model, CANT the Z.1011, and Breda their 82 design. Savoia-Marchetti tried to join the competition, entering a twin-engine variant of the SM.79, but the design received a lot of criticism, and rightfully so. It was basically just a converted airliner. Its bomb load and location of the bombs were unsatisfactory, and featured weak defensive armament. The design was rejected from the competition. However, that was not the end of the military design of the plane. During its record-breaking flight to Rome, a few pilots of the Italian Air Force had the opportunity to test the aircraft, and the news of their good experience reached the ears of Generale Giuseppe Valle, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. The general stepped in and overruled the decision of the board, placing an order for 24 of the SM.79 design. A modified prototype was sent to the Air Force Testing Center in June 1935, receiving the registration number MM260. The military version received various modifications over the civilian design. Though it didn't differ in structure, it was modified with a center bomb bay with the capability to carry 1200 kilograms of bombs, and it carried the bombs vertically, like on the German HG-111. Since the engine in the nose prevented the conventional bomb sight placement, a ventral gondola was added housing the bomb sight and the bombardier. The military variant also featured 3 defensive armament positions. The large distinctive hump was added on the top of the plane, housing a forward-firing 12.7mm machine gun and another rear-firing flexible one. A 7.7mm machine gun was mounted in the waist gunner position, which could fire on either side. Additionally, the bombardier gondola could mount an optional 12.7mm machine gun in the rear as well. The SM.79 entered service with the Regia Aeronautica in 1936, and after the first 3 units, the following production models now used the 780 horsepower Alfa Romeo 126 RC34 engines, improving the performance of the bomber even further. The opinions on the aircraft still differed after it entered service. On one hand, it was a successful bomber with good performance, great handling, and cheap. On the other hand, its defensive armament was lacking, and its bomb bay was too small, and the vertical design prevented the use of bigger bombs. In big part, the success of the SM.79 was thanks to the failure of the other competing designs. From the original proposals to the Air Force competition, only the Fiat BR20 entered service in 1937. The failure of the other designs meant more orders were placed for the SM.79. While the military variants' development and testing went on, Savoia-Marchetti built several different civilian variants and export military variants as well. The civilian SM.79C and the long-range SM.79T variants set various world records in the coming years. The company also worked on the export version of the plane, and since many of the interested countries expressed the need for forward defense armament, the 2-engined SM.79B model was born, with a glazed nose and a conventional twin-engine setup. The most notable customers of the SM.79B were Iraq and Romania. And with that, we arrived to the variants of the plane. The SM.79 was the original prototype, using Piaggio engines, which later were swapped for the more powerful and reliable Alfa Romeo 125 RC35. The following SM.79-1 was the first production variant. The first few models were still built with the Alfa Romeo 125 engines, after that they used the 126 RC34 models. The early models featured a longer, more closed dorsal hump, which on later models was changed to a shorter design. The SM.79-2 was the torpedo bomber variant. With its bomb bay removed, and sometimes additional crew armor added. The next SM-79-3 or SM-79 bis was an extended range torpedo bomber. These variants had the ventral gondola deleted, additional 1000-liter fuel tank added in the place of the bomb bay, and they used the new stronger 860 horsepower Alfa Romeo 128 engines. This variant also featured improved defensive armament, with two 12.7mm machine guns added in the waist gunner positions. The maximum speed of this type increased to 475 km an hour. The SM-79B was the twin-engined export version, using Fiat A80 engines and featuring a glazed nose. This variant was slower than the original. A modification of the B version was the SM-79JR, built for Romania using German Junkers Jumo 211S engines. The SM-79 was 16.2 meters long, with a wingspan of 20.2 meters. It had an empty weight of 7,700 kilograms and a maximum takeoff weight of 10,050 kilograms. It used three Alfa Romeo 128 RC18 engines, producing 861 horsepower each. It could reach a maximum speed of 460 km an hour and a cruise speed of 373 km an hour. It had a range of 2,600 km and a service ceiling of 7,500 meters. The defensive armament consisted of three 12.7mm machine guns, one forward firing, one in the gondola and one in the dorsal hump, and additional two 7.7mm machine guns in the waist gunner positions. The plane had a maximum bomb load of 1,200 kilograms, or it could carry one or two torpedoes externally. But with two torpedoes mounted, the performance of the plane dropped significantly, so only one was used operationally. The SM-79 entered service in early 1936, and they first saw action later that year, when some of them were sent to Spain to assist the nationalist forces. They were very successful in this conflict, as in the 3 years of use, only a few were lost in combat from the 99 planes sent over to Spain. The new bombers were faster than most fighters used in the conflict, so they operated with relative safety. The experiences gathered in Spain proved to be valuable, and led to many minor modifications on the type. But they also led to false confidence, as the bomber mainly faced slower, older fighters in this conflict. To test the night bombing capabilities, General Valle himself went on a mission in January 1938, flying an SM-79 from Guidonia to Barcelona, dropping his bombs over the harbor after 5.5 hours of flight. After the Spanish Civil War ended, the 61 remaining bombers were given to the Spanish Air Force. When Italy entered World War II, the SM-79 made up 14 of the 23 bomber groups in their Air Force. The experiences in the Spanish Civil War filled the Italians with confidence in the new modern bomber. However, they had to face reality very soon when meeting modern monoplane fighters, and it was sobering. The SM-79s participated in the attack against Malta in 1940, flying from Sicily. But when meeting the British Hawker Hurricanes, they quickly started to suffer losses. Soon the SM-79s were recalled from Sicily and sent to North Africa and Albania. During the North African campaign, they were used in offensive bombing missions and in anti-shipping operations, but the slowly growing Allied air power caused a lot of aircraft losses. They also flew missions in East Africa, in Ethiopia, and on the Balkans against Greece and Yugoslavia. Some of them also helped the German forces during the invasion of Crete in May 1941, attacking Allied ships. But the most frequent use of the type was over the Mediterranean against Allied shipping, and this was the role they found the most success during World War II. They started flying torpedo runs from 1940, attacking merchant ships and carrying out attacks against Allied harbors. In September, the heavy cruiser HMS CANT were hit by one of their torpedoes. Then in October, they heavily damaged the cruiser HMS Liverpool. 1941 and 1942 saw the height of their success, when the SM-79s managed to get an average of 8 torpedo hits for losing one aircraft. In addition to many merchant ships, they managed to sink the destroyer HMS Fearless, damage the HMS Manchester cruiser, and the HMS Nelson battleship. In 1941, a planned replacement for the type, the SM-84 was introduced, which featured similar construction but new fuselage, a dual tail, improved defensive armament, and used Fiat G.50 engines. But it never lived up to the expectations. Later, when the SM-79 was introduced, these were withdrawn. In 1942, maybe their most well-known battle happened against the Allied convoy headed to Malta during Operation Harpoon. Though the convoy lost several ships on the way under heavy German and Italian attacks, only 2 of those were credited for the Italian torpedo bombers. By the end of 1942, the success of these planes faded quickly, in the light of the increasing Allied air superiority and the type becoming more and more obsolete. Their former good record dropped as well. Now they lost 2 free planes for just 1 torpedo hit. They participated in attacks against the Allied fleets in the invasion of Sicily and mainland Italy, but without any great success. After the armistice, the SM-79s in southern Italy were used as transport aircraft by the Allies, but the northern forces kept fighting on the German side. They attacked Allied ships at the Anzio beachhead in March 1944. Then in June, they flew to attack Gibraltar, where they badly damaged 4 ships, surprising the island's defenses. Their last victory came on the Adriatic Sea, when 2 SM-79s managed to sink a 5,000-ton merchant ship in January 1945. Though the SM-79 is not the most famous or most well-known plane of the war, it was a unique design, and it was quite successful as a torpedo bomber as well. Chapter 3. The Macchi MC.207 and MC.205 Gore. The Italian Air Force, just like many others around the globe, operated biplanes between the 2 world wars, like the Fiat CR-30 and 32. But as the 1930s arrived, and the aviation technology made big leaps, they came to the realization, as did every other major air force, that the new, fast, low-wing monoplanes outperforming the biplanes now, and they will be the future. Though the Fiat CR-32 only entered service in 1934, in February 1936, already new specifications were issued by the DGCA for a new modern fighter plane. The requirements specified a low-wing monoplane with retractable landing gear featuring 250 caliber Breda machine guns. First the requirement was only 1 machine gun, but later it was modified to 2, a maximum speed no less than 500 km an hour, and a climb rate of 6,000 meters in 5 minutes. The designs also needed to incorporate the Fiat A74 radial engine. This engine choice was a result of a ministry directive from 1932, which instructed the Italian manufacturers to concentrate their efforts on air-cooled radial engines, as they were deemed to be more reliable than the water-cooled inline engines. But as it turned out later, this decision caused a lot of problems for the Italian Air Force and the aircraft designers as well. There was no shortage of candidates for the new tender, as most of the big aircraft manufacturers in Italy sent in their designs for the new specifications. Macchi presented their MC200, Fiat their G.50, Aeronautica Ambra entered the AUT-18 design, Caproni their Vizzola F5, IMAM sent in their RO51 proposal, and Reggiane their RA2000. The work started at Macchi on the prototypes, and the first plane was ready for its maiden flight in December 1937. It featured its signature humps on the engine cowlings. These allowed the cowling to be a smaller diameter than on the Fiat G.50, which used the same engine. All the competing aircraft participated in a ministry evaluation in 1938, where the MC200 proved to be superior to the other designs. The closest competitor was the RA2000, but its vulnerable wing-mounted fuel tanks and lack of structural strength led to its rejection. The Macchi plane could achieve the required 500 km an hour in level flight, but not any higher due to its underpowered engine. But during the test flights it was observed that its strong construction allowed it to reach 800 km an hour in dive without any problems. Not long after the second prototype has been finished, an order for 99 aircraft was placed. Though the MC-200 was stable and flew without problems, it was found that in very tight turns, it had a tendency of flipping over easily. This was actually a common problem on most aircraft that entered the evaluation, and it was traced back to the constant profile of the wings, which was rectified soon. Though the radial engines used on these planes were simpler, more reliable, and less vulnerable, they had a big drawback. As I talked about this in my earlier FW190 video as well, the problem with the air-cooled radial engines is they need a large surface area for cooling, which causes a lot of drag, and the engine cowling design have to be balanced between the cooling and the aerodynamics. But unlike the late war American-made radial engines, which could produce close to 2000 horsepower and could overcome the aerodynamic insufficiency by sheer power, the Fiat engine used in the MC-200 only delivered 870 horsepower. The aircraft, though it was very maneuverable, it was slower than most of its adversaries because of its underpowered engine. It could outturn a Hawker Hurricane and it had better climb rate, but the Hurricane was faster than the MC-200 and carried a stronger armament than the two machine guns on the Italian aircraft. And with that we arrived to the specifications of this plane. The MC-200 was not a big plane. With a length of 8.25 meters and a wingspan of 10.58 meters, it was comparable in size to the FW190. It used the Fiat A74 engine, producing 870 horsepower. With this engine, the fighter's maximum speed was 504 km an hour. It had a range of around 570 km and a service ceiling of 8,900 meters. Its armament consisted of two 12.7mm Breda machine guns, and the later MC-200CB fighter bomber version could carry up to 300 kg of bombs. The fighter was accepted in service in 1939, after its successful flight tests, though the first unit that received them opted to stay on their Fiat CR-42 biplanes, as the pilots were used to that type and they didn't have enough time to practice with their new modern monoplanes. They first saw combat at the end of June 1940, after Italy entered the war, and achieved their first kill in November. The MC-200s repeatedly clashed with the British Hurricanes over the Mediterranean, over Greece, and Yugoslavia as well. While the Hurricane was faster, the Italian planes were a good match for the British fighter, though their armament was much lighter. They were also used in North Africa, where the first units arrived in April 1941, and apart from the familiar Hurricanes, later they faced the American P-40 fighters as well. In addition to their fighter duties, the MC-200s were used as bomber escorts and ground attackers as well, where their radial engines were proved to be an advantage, being less vulnerable than the water-cooled engine in the German fighters. 51 of them were also sent to the Eastern Front in August 1941. They continuously flew missions as fighter cover, bomber escort, and low-level attackers. But as the winter arrived, the operations were sometimes impossible, as the fighters had an open cockpit and the Italian flight groups were not equipped for the low temperatures. The MC-200 was a good match against the Soviet fighters of the time, which were also usually slower but more maneuverable planes, like the Polikarpov I-16. But by 1942, with the arrival of the newer and faster Allied fighters, the MC-200 was hopelessly outmatched with its underpowered engine and weak armament. Though there were attempts to upgrade the type with more powerful engines, like the MC-200 bis model equipped with the Piaggio RC45 engine, or the MC-201 featuring the Fiat A76 engine, but none of these were deemed satisfactory, and the type as a frontline fighter was replaced with more modern designs. And that brings us to its successor, the Macchi MC.205 Folgore. Though the Macchi MC200 and other early Italian designs held their own against the Allied fighters during 1940 and 41, the disadvantages of the weak radial engine were known right after the type entered service. Because of the earlier decision to push the radial air-cooled engines for the Italian fighters, they fell behind the more modern German, British and American types. Though the Fiat company started working on their own inline aircraft engine, the A38, but the project was later cancelled, and instead the rights to manufacture the German Daimler DB601 engine were bought. This was the engine that powered the famous Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters. 4 complete engines were also imported from Germany, and one of those were sent to Macchi. Their chief designer, Mario Castoldi, who designed the former MC200 as well, immediately set to work to design a new airframe around the Daimler engine. In the new design, he used as much from the former MC200 components as possible. So the wings, landing gear and tail section were all basically the same, but the fuselage was entirely new. Thanks to using parts from the former design, the construction of the prototype started in January 1940, and only 7 months later it was ready. The maiden flight was conducted in August, just 2 months after Italy entered the war, and the first tests were very successful. The aircraft managed to reach more than 600 km/h speed by retaining the excellent maneuverability of its predecessor. The type was soon ordered into service based on the flight reports from the test pilots, but the start of the production was a bit rocky. The engine manufacturing started slowly at Alfa Romeo, so the first series of aircraft were built with imported German Daimler engines. The airframe wasn't really easy to manufacture either. It was estimated the MC202 needed almost 3 times as much man-hours to build than the comparable Bf-109. During its production, the type went through many changes. Maybe the most notable is the air intake on the nose, which was changed from the square one on the prototype to a long tubular design on the early production run, and later to a larger diameter one incorporating the sand filter as well. The MC202 was very similar to its predecessor. It had a length of 8.85 meters and a wingspan of 10.58 meters. This model used the Alfa Romeo RA1000 engine, a license-built Daimler DB601, producing 1160 horsepower. With this engine, the fighter's maximum speed was 600 km/h, around 100 km/h faster than its predecessor. Thanks to the more streamlined fuselage, its range extended to 765 km, and its service ceiling was 11,500 meters. Its armament consisted of 2 12.7mm Breda machine guns and 2 7.7mm machine guns in the wings, though these were often removed as they were not very effective. Despite the production slowly ramping up, by July 1941 the MC202 started to arrive to the units, and they first saw action in September during the Siege of Malta. The new Italian fighter proved to be superior to the British Hurricane, though its armament was still weaker. Later in 1942, as the Spitfire Mark V started to arrive to the island, the MC202 could hold its own against those as well, but the weaker armament and lack of radio equipment hindered their performance. The MC202s were sent to North Africa as well in November 1941, but it was an unpleasant surprise to the Allies, as it could outperform the Hurricanes and the P-40s as well, and only the later Spitfires performed similarly. As the Allies slowly pushed the Axis forces from North Africa, the fighters fought over Tunisia, then Sicily, and in the end over Italy. Some of them were sent to the Eastern Front in May 1942. They were used mainly as bomber escorts. But as the winter months arrived, they faced the same challenges as the MC200s before. They could barely conduct any combat operations because of the lack of proper equipment. They flew their last combat sorties on the Eastern Front in January 1943. By the time the Italian armistice the same year, only around 100 of them remained operational. Though the roots of these fighters reach back to the 1930s, they were amongst the best planes used in numbers by the Italian Air Force during World War II. Especially the MC202, which fixed the main weakness of its predecessor, the underpowered engine, and it was considered a very good fighter plane, unequal to the British Spitfire. Chapter 4. The CANT Z.1007 Alcione. The story of this aircraft starts in the early 1930s, when the Italian Air Ministry asked Filippo Zapata to return to Italy from France, where he worked for the Blériot Company, and take the chief designer position at the CRDA Aviation Division. In the first part of the 1930s, he designed several excellent seaplanes for the company, like the Z501 flying boat, the Z505 prototype, and the Z506 float plane, which was a great transport aircraft and entered service in 1936. He also designed several land planes for CANT, but the earlier designs were not built until the Z.1007 and the Z.1011, which were both designed in 1935. The new 1007 was based heavily on the earlier Z.506 floatplane, using similar wooden construction, wing shapes, and fuselage design. It featured a very clean, slim airframe designed to reduce drag as much as possible. In the push for the cleanest airframe possible, the pilots were seated in tandem instead of side by side, and the bombardier position was placed in the wing root instead of the front. The plane used three Isotta Fraschini Asso 11 RC-15 inline engines, producing 830 horsepower each, and made its maiden flight in March 1937. The aircraft showed good flight characteristics, but it was clearly held back by the underpowered engines, which actually was a common problem for the Italian designs of the time. Several different configurations and modifications were tested to improve its performance, the last of them featuring annual radiators, making the prototype look like it used radial engines. The production variants of the Z.1007 used the newer Asso 11 RC-40 engines and featured additional aerodynamic improvements, but their performance was still behind the required numbers. These variants had a top speed of 428 km an hour and a service ceiling of 6,650 meters. They featured similar armament to other contemporary designs, with an open dorsal machine gun position on the top and another machine gun at the bottom. This variant had a limited production run of 110 aircraft. Luckily for the design, soon the new Piaggio P11 RC-40 radial engines became available, which produced close to 1,000 horsepower each. Trials with these engines showed big increase in both maximum speed and ceiling, despite the bigger frontal area. The prototype using these engines managed to reach a top speed of 475 km an hour and an altitude of 8,000 meters. Zapata decided to rework the original plans to make better use of the stronger engine, and the Z.1007 bis was born. The new aircraft was about 2 meters longer than the original. The new engines and the size increase resulted about 1,000 kilograms more weight, but the larger fuselage allowed for 1,000 kilograms internal bomb load instead of the original 500 kilograms. It also allowed the designer to move the bombardier position from the wing root to the bottom of the aircraft. The plane featured improved defensive armament as well, a Caproni dorsal turret, bigger caliber guns, and also featured underwing racks for additional bombs. The fuel capacity was also increased by 200 liters. Despite the bigger fuselage, the pilot positions remained the same tandem configuration, slightly offset to the port side to allow passage for the bombardier to his position. The aircraft had an advantage over other designs, as unlike many other Axis bombers, it had a long bomb bay, and it carried the bombs in horizontal position, allowing it to use bigger bombs. The designs which carried the bombs in vertical position, like the SM.79 Sparviero or the Heinkel HG-111, were restricted to use smaller bombs. The plane also had an option to carry 2 torpedoes under the fuselage, but it was never used in this fashion. Though the new aircraft was a more advanced design than its predecessor, it still used the same wooden construction. From this type, 450 were built. At the end of the 1930s, the Regia Aeronautica had big plans to build a force of around 3,000 aircraft by 1940. So they asked for new bomber designs from most bigger Italian manufacturers. Fiat presented their BR20 and the BGA designs, Caproni their CA135, Piaggio the P32 model, CANT their Z.1011, and Breda their 82 design. Some of these proposals failed for one reason or another. Some of them entered service, but only the Savoia-Marchetti SM.79 proved to be actually good, with advantages over foreign designs. But this type only entered production and service after a series of lucky events. Because most designs proposed to the Air Force failed, including CANT's own Z.1011 twin-engine design, the development of the Z.1007 bis was followed with great interest. In August 1938, 32 units of the new design were ordered, so the model was put into production late 1938, and the first bis model made its maiden flight in June 1939. The test flights of the type were concluded by August at the Guidonia Test Center, and resulted in reports stating the handling of the aircraft being excellent, and the type being even better than the SM-79 Sparviero. They suggested ordering the type into large-scale production, as it was the highest performance bomber available to the Air Force at that time. Even before the 1007 bis started testing, another model, the Z.1007 TER, was proposed, with the sole purpose of setting speed records. General Lavalle liked the idea and ordered one aircraft to be modified for this purpose. The changes to the aircraft were so extensive though that it received a new designation, Z.1015. Later, another design was proposed to use the Z.1007 TER naming, an all-metal version of the type instead of wooden construction, and using the new stronger Alfa Romeo 135 engines, which produced 1,400 horsepower each. The Air Force welcomed this proposal, but again the type was renamed to Z.1015B instead, as it was too different from the Z.1007 design. 32 units were ordered from this type, but the Air Force requested even more changes on the new proposal. The designer thought the requested changes were not worth the effort, and proposed his new twin-engine plane, the Z.1018 instead. The Air Force liked the new design, and the order for the 32 Z.1015B models was converted to this new type instead. So the story of the all-metal version of the Alcione ended before it even started. But later, the final version of the plane again was designated to Z.1007 TER, and this one finally stuck. This variant used the conventional construction, but new Piaggio P19 engines, producing 1,150 horsepower each. This was the final variant of the type, arriving in early 1943, and only built in limited numbers. All the different variants of the aircraft might be a bit confusing, so let's do a quick rundown in order. The Z.1007 was the original model, with the shorter fuselage, open machine gun position on the top, and used the Isotta Fraschini ASSO 11 RC-15 engines. The following Z.1007 bis featured the longer, bigger fuselage, upgraded defensive armament, bigger bomb load, and used the Piaggio P11 RC-40 engines, producing 1,000 horsepower each. Later variants featured a new twin-tail, but there's no separate designation for those, and the single and twin-tail designs were used together. The series 1 to 3 used the single tail, and the following ones had the twin-tail design. The Z.1015 was the single model modified for record-breaking flights, using the Alfa Romeo 135 engines. These power plants were problematic though, and the type was put aside until 1942, when it finally flew but using Piaggio P12 engines. With the new engines, it managed to reach a top speed of 563 km an hour. This variant was the first one mentioned as Z.1007 TER, before it was renamed to Z.1015. The Z.1015B was the proposed all-metal version of the Z.1007 bis, using Alfa Romeo 135 engines. This variant was cancelled before production in favor of the new Z.1018, and it also was mentioned as Z.1007 TER before renamed to Z.1015B. And finally, the real Z.1007 TER, the final production variant, which appeared in 1943 and used the Piaggio P19 RC-45 engines. The Z.1007 bis was 18.35 meters long, with a wingspan of 24.8 meters. Roughly comparable in size to the B-26 Marauder or the Heinkel HG-111 bomber. It had an empty weight of 9,396 kilograms and a maximum takeoff weight of 13,621 kilograms. The plane used 3 Piaggio P11 air-cooled radial engines, producing 1,000 horsepower each. With these engines, it could reach a maximum speed of 458 km an hour and a cruise speed of 339 km an hour. The plane had a range of 1,795 km and a service ceiling of 7,500 meters. Its defensive armament consisted of two 12.7mm and two 7.7mm machine guns. It could carry 1,200 kilograms of bombs internally and 1,000 kilograms externally. It also had the option to carry two 800-kilogram torpedoes under the fuselage, but it was never used in this configuration. The Z.1007 Alcione was used on every front of the European theatre, though they mostly operated at the Mediterranean. The first 1007s were delivered to the Air Force in May 1939 and formally entered service in early 1940, but these early models were not deemed combat ready and were mainly used for training. At spring 1940, the newer Z.1007 bis models started to arrive to the units. But when Italy entered the war in June, only 4 of these were available at the 47th Stormo, and 31 of the early ASO-powered ones at the 16th Stormo. The first combat action for the Alcione came in August, when 10 of them bombed an airfield on Malta, and they continued to fly attack missions against the island until late 1942. The type also participated in the Battle of Britain, though only 6 of them were sent to Belgium, and they only flew one mission worthy of mention. They were first used in bigger numbers during the invasion of Greece in October 1940, with 60 of these bombers used. During one of the missions over Greece happened an interesting event, when a Greek pilot who already managed to shoot down one of the bombers rammed the tail of another when he ran out of ammo. He managed to perform an emergency landing after the collision, and even arrested the bomber crew after they landed with their parachutes. In the Greek campaign, the weakness of the wooden structure of the planes became evident, as the humidity from the rain distorted it, and they required constant monitoring. They participated in combat actions over Yugoslavia as well in April 1941, and they were also used on the Eastern Front for a short period, but again their wooden construction was not suitable for the climate. After this point, they were mainly used on the Mediterranean, where they participated in the attacks against the British convoys sent to resupply the forces of Malta during Operation Pedestal in August 1942. At the end of the year, they flew missions from Sardinia against the advancing Allied forces in North Africa. After the armistice, most of these planes were captured by the Allies, but the Germans managed to take some 30 of them as well. The re-established Italian Air Force used the type against the Germans in some missions, and they flew air support over the Balkans until the end of the war. The Z.1007 Alcione was maybe the best Italian bomber of World War II, but since they were used in smaller numbers than other types, and after a while mainly at night attack missions, they are not as well documented as some other aircraft. Chapter 5. The Reggiane Re.2000 and 2001. During the 1930s, many new aircraft was developed in Italy and entered service with the Regia Aeronautica, as the Italians, just like other military powers around the world, followed the changes in the aviation industry before World War II. Many fighter families appeared during this decade, and their development paths followed very similar directions, influenced by technological developments, ministry directives, and the political events. The main changes in aviation technology happened in the middle of the 1930s, so even though the Fiat CR32 biplane just entered service in 1934, 2 years later the DGCA already issued new specifications for more advanced fighter planes. Not surprisingly, the urgent need for faster, more capable interceptors was caused by the appearance of new modern bombers, which as it turned out were faster than the traditional biplane fighters. This also caused the new bombers to feature very light defensive armament. As many designers falsely imagined, these new fast planes will simply outrun the fighters. Following the new trends in aviation, the new requirements asked for fighter designs, which had to be low-wing monoplanes, feature retractable undercarriage, and be capable of reaching at least 500 km/h speed, and a climb rate of 6,000 meters in about 5 minutes. There was one thing, however, in the specifications that held back all the upcoming designs, and this was the requirement of using air-cooled radial engines. This choice can be traced back to a 1932 directive, which instructed manufacturers to prioritize this type of engines over the inline liquid-cooled ones, which were deemed too fragile and unreliable at the time. And as it turned out, this decision hampered Italian aircraft development for quite a while. Most of the Italian aircraft manufacturers entered designs for this new competition, and some of these aircraft became the foundations of a whole family of fighters. Ambra entered their AUT-18 design. IMAN sent in their RO-51 proposal. Caproni their Vizzola F5. But the most successful and well-known ones were maybe the Fiat G.50 and the Macchi MC.205. You might notice we didn't mention the Reggiane aircraft on the list. That is because the work on this design only started in 1938, after the ministry initiated the so-called Program R, aimed to modernize the Italian Air Force. Most of the fighters considered in this program were already in the prototype phase, following the 1936 competition. The Reggiane design was the only one directly developed for this 1938 goal. Though this aircraft was the first original design of the company, the progress on it was fast, as the designers Roberto Longhi and Antonio Alessio used the experience Longhi picked up working in the United States. This explains the shape of the aircraft and its resemblance to the Savoia-Marchetti P-35. The prototype was built in just about 7 months, and already made its maiden flight in May 1939. The new plane was 7.99 meters long, with a wingspan of 11 meters. It featured a very streamlined fuselage and elliptical wings, which also housed the fuel cells. The fighter featured a 985 horsepower Piaggio engine, and during the trials managed to reach 514 km/h speed, a climb rate of 6,000 meters in 6.5 minutes, and had a range of 1,040 kilometers. Its armament, in line with other Italian designs of the time, consisted of two 12.7mm machine guns. In August the same year, it was delivered to Guidonia for evaluation. Since it was designed 2 years later, the new plane showed better aerodynamic efficiency than its rivals, and during the test flights it outperformed most other designs, not just other Italian fighters like the MC-200, but even the German Messerschmitt Bf-109. But the design was not without faults. Despite its great performance, the lack of structural strength and vulnerable wing-mounted fuel tanks in the end led to the rejection of the type. Though originally during the test flights, a contract for manufacturing 200 units of the type was laid out, the negative technical reports resulted in the cancellation of the planned order. Though the type was rejected and only a handful of these models were used by the Italian Air Force, this was not the end of the design. The government authorized the type to be sold to international customers, and several countries showed interest. Sweden purchased 60 of these planes, which they designated J-20. The British government ordered 300 units in December 1939, but this order was understandably cancelled when Italy entered the war in 1940 on the German side. The Hungarian government also ordered 70 units, and later even acquired the license to build the type themselves. These mostly served on the Eastern Front and in defense roles, until they were replaced by German Bf-109s from 1942. The Reggiane Marina also experimented with the type and developed a catapult-launched version, the RE-2000 CAT. These were converted from planes seized from foreign orders, and they were used on the Littorio-class battleships, Italia, Roma, and Vittorio Veneto. Though the Reggiane fighter had some use in various roles and had international orders, a newer type was soon developed based on this aircraft to overcome its deficiencies, and that was the RE-2001 Falco II. The RE-2000, apart from the structural weakness and unprotected fuel tanks, had another weakness which it shared with most contemporary Italian fighter designs: the underpowered air-cooled radial engine, which hampered its performance. Though the Italians put considerable efforts to develop more advanced inline engines, like the Fiat A38, but their development was troublesome and slow. So in 1939, the authorities decided it would be easier to purchase the license to build the German Daimler DB601 engines. The license deal happened at the same time as the evaluation of the RE-2000, and Reggiane was instructed to redesign the type to accommodate the new powerful inline engine, built under license by Alfa Romeo. The redesign of the type was mainly focused on installing the new engine, though the fuselage also became a bit more sleek and a bit longer. The tail, wings, landing gear, cockpit, and overall construction of the type was mostly unchanged. As we can see on the comparison pictures, the new design was really just a modification of its predecessor. In that sense, the redesign followed the same steps as other Italian fighter families of the time, which all followed the same principle of modifying earlier designs to accommodate the stronger German inline engines, like the Macchi MC.200 and MC.205. retaining most of the earlier design resulted in very quick progress on the new aircraft, and the prototype of the new fighter, designated RE-2001 Falco II, was already finished in July 1940 and made its first flight the same month. After the initial test flights, the plane was transferred to Guidonia for evaluation in August. The test flights showed good improvements, as the new, more powerful engine helped the plane to reach 536 km/h speed, but it kept its great maneuverability. The evaluation was a success for the new fighter, but the ministry requested a redesign on the wing and fuel tanks. Further changes were made by installing a solid fairing on the back of the cockpit and the installation of two wing-mounted 7.7mm machine guns, in addition to the 12.7mm ones in the engine cowlings. The new wings now featured a three-spar design with armored fuel tanks, contrary to the failed original design of the RE-2000 model. The promising results earned a contract for Reggiane in October to deliver 200 aircraft, and additional 150 units were ordered to be built by Caproni. The first pre-production variant was delivered in May 1941, and the first production model in September the same year. But the production of the new aircraft was hampered by several factors. The Reggiane factory and the size of the workforce was insufficient, and had to be scaled up for the serial production. Deliveries of the license-built Alfa Romeo engines were also slower than expected. By the end of 1941, only 10 pre-production aircraft and 27 production units were finished. The engine production actually never really managed to catch up to the number of airframes, so there were plans to test other engine types, as well as different variations of the fighter. So let's take a look at those now. The RE-2001 was the original prototype. 2 units were built. During testing, a new low-drag wing was designed, incorporating the radiators, and it was installed on the first prototype, creating the RE-2001 bis variant. Though the results were promising, in the end this modification was not approved. The so-called RE-2001 Zero series were the 10 pre-production aircraft built to speed up the service trials. The RE-2001 Series 1 was the first production run of 100 units. 39 of them were built as RE-2001 CB fighter bomber variants, featuring a bomb rack with the capability to carry a 250 kg bomb. 2 were modified for catapult launch trials, and 12 units were built with arrestor hooks for testing the possibility of using the type as a carrier-based fighter on the planned Aquila aircraft carrier. Though, as we know, in the end, this carrier was never finished, another 50 planes were ordered from these carrier-based variants, designated RE-2001 OR, or Series 2. These only differed from the basic design in the installation of the arrestor hook and the catapult launch capabilities. As the progress on the planned aircraft carrier was extremely slow, the ordered 50 Series 2 aircraft was finished as night fighter variants, under the designation RE-2001 CN, or Series 3. These featured exhaust flame dampers and carried 2 20mm cannons in underwing gondolas, and to save weight, the wing-mounted 7.7mm machine guns were removed. Later, another 50 units of the night fighter variants were ordered, but only 34 of them were finished before the armistice. The RE-2001 GV models were a small batch from the fighter bomber variants, modified with reinforced fuselage to carry a single 640 kg bomb. The RE-2001G was an experimental variant modified to carry a single 600 kg torpedo. And finally, the RE-2001 Delta was an experimental variant to work around the slow deliveries of the Alfa Romeo engines. This variant used an Isotta Fraschini Delta RC16 engine. Though this engine was available in numbers, its low output of only 840 horsepower resulted in lower performance, and this variant only managed to reach a top speed of 523 km/h, and its climb rate was much worse than the original designs. The RE-2001 was 8.36 meters long, with a wingspan of 11 meters. It had an empty weight of 2,495 kilograms, and a maximum takeoff weight of 3,280 kilograms. The plane was powered by an Alfa Romeo RA1000 RC41 liquid-cooled engine, which was the license-built version of the Daimler DB601, delivering 1,160 horsepower. With this engine, it could reach a top speed of 542 km an hour and a cruise speed of around 400 km an hour. The service ceiling of the fighter was 11,000 meters, and it had a combat range of 1,100 kilometers. Its armament consisted of two 12.7mm machine guns in the engine cowlings and two 7.7mm machine guns in the wings. Additionally, the fighter-bomber variants could carry either a 250 kg or the modified variants a 640 kg bomb. The first RE2001 production variants started to arrive to the units in late 1941. The second Gruppo was the first unit to receive them, but the type only started to fly combat missions from May 1942 over Malta. Flying missions over the Mediterranean, the Italian pilots mainly faced Hurricanes and Spitfires. The new Reggiane fighters were more than a match for the British planes, though like most Italian fighters, they were slower than their opponents. During the spring, the Italians clashed with the Allied pilots numerous times, with losses on both sides. And as experience showed, the Reggiane fighters at low and medium altitudes were a match even for the Spitfire 5, though at higher altitudes they were at a disadvantage. The first RE2001 CB variants were received by the end of June, and these fighter-bomber variants also started to fly missions against Malta in late 1942. The modified RE2001 GV models participated in the attack against HMS Victorious during Operation Pedestal, carrying 640 kg bombs. Though apparently one of them scored a hit on the carrier, the bomb failed to explode. The Italian fighter squadrons were gradually pulled back as the Allied forces gained advantage, and by mid-1943 all of the Reggiane fighters were ordered to the defense of the Italian mainland. But the slow production resulted in a limited number built from these fighters, so despite their flying qualities, they didn't have a great impact on the events. By September 1943, when Italy signed the armistice, 73 of these fighters were in service, but only 33 of those were flyable. And the armistice also meant the end of the production for the type, with just 237 units built altogether. The surviving planes still flew missions on the Allied side until May 1944, when all the remaining ones were assigned to training schools. The Reggiane RE2000 and 2001 were some of the most capable Italian fighters of World War II, but their slow production limited their numbers, so they didn't have any meaningful impact on the outcome of the war. Chapter 6: The Macchi MC.205 Veltro. Though the development of the MC.205 only started in 1941, but its roots reach way back in the mid-1930s. The Regia Aeronautica, just like most other air forces around the world, started a big modernization program in the 1930s, following the appearance of new technologies and advances in aviation. Though they still had biplane fighters entering service in 1934, like the Fiat CR32, but the DGCA in 1936 issued new specifications for new, faster monoplane fighters. They asked for low-wing monoplane designs, featuring a retractable landing gear, at least 500 km an hour top speed, and the use of the Fiat A74 radial engine. As a result of this competition, several fighter designs entered service, like the Reggiane RE2000, the Fiat G.50, or the new Macchi design, the MC200. The work of Mario Castoldi, which became the base for a long line of fighter planes in the upcoming years. But all of these fighters had a big drawback: the radial air-cooled engine, which was used because of a 1932 directive instructing Italian manufacturers to concentrate their efforts on these types, instead of water-cooled inline engines, which were deemed vulnerable and unreliable at the time. As a result, despite being light and nimble, these fighters all lacked power and lagged behind the newer German and Allied designs. By the time the MC200 entered service in 1939, the Italians already tried to resolve this issue, developing engines like the Fiat A38. But the development of these engines was troublesome and took a long time. So in the end, they opted to purchase the license to build the German Daimler DB601 engines, which powered the famous Bf109 fighters. After the agreement on the license deal, a new breed of fighters were designed, which, thanks to the new powerful engines and more streamlined fuselage, could reach higher speeds than their predecessors. One of these was the new Macchi design, the MC.202, which featured a new fuselage built around the DB601 engine, but to save development time used many parts from its predecessor. The wings, tail section, landing gear and other parts were all used on the new fighter basically unchanged. The new fighters appeared in 1941 and showed improved performance, but the use of the DB601 engines turned out to be more troublesome than anticipated. The production of the license-built RA1000 engines was very slow, and the Germans refused to overhaul the used engines, as the DB601 was already out of production. By this time, a new, even more powerful Daimler engine, the DB605, was available, and it provided around 30% uplift in performance, developing 1500 horsepower compared to the 1160 on the DB601 engine. So the Reggiane Aeronautica decided to license this engine type as well, and the job to build these was assigned to Fiat. The Air Force requested several manufacturers to submit fighter designs built around this new engine. Numerous proposals were entered, and these later became known as Series 5 fighters, as they all included the number 5 in their designations, referring to the DB605 engine. Reggiane entered their RE2005 Sagittario design, Fiat the G.55 Centauro, and Macchi also presented plans for an entirely new fighter, the MC.205 Orione. But since the development time for a new aircraft was long, and Macchi was lagging behind their competitors, they proposed an interim solution: to convert their MC.202 fighter to the new engine, as it already used the Daimler DB601 power plant, which was quite similar to the DB605. So the new fighter would only need small modifications to incorporate the new engine. The officials agreed to this solution, and thus the MC.205V Veltro was created, originally designated MC.202 bis, featuring the new more powerful engine, but otherwise, back from the firewall, the construction of the plane was basically unchanged. This aircraft was only considered as a stopgap solution, until the fully new designs of Reggiane, Fiat and Macchi could arrive. The first MC.205 prototype made its maiden flight in April 1942. It managed to reach 642 km/h speed, but the test flight showed both the RE2005 and the G.50 had better performance than the MC.205 at higher altitudes. The Macchi design performed best at medium altitudes due to using the same wings as its predecessor, the MC.202, which was also just a modified version of the old MC.200, which first flew in 1937. Nonetheless, it was accepted until the other designs will be available, as it could enter production earlier than its rivals, due to it only being a modification of the MC.202. The key features that differentiate the Veltro from its predecessor are the blunt propeller spinner and the two cylindrical coolers below the exhaust pipes. The MC.205V variant was put into production less than half a year after its first flight, and entered service in early 1943 with the first deliveries to the units in February. Macchi built 100 of these aircraft as Series 1, featuring the original armament of the MC.202, two 12.7mm and two 7.7mm machine guns. Fiat was assigned to build 150 units as Series 2, but these were never built as the Fiat factory was destroyed by Allied bombing raids in December 1942. Further 450 units were planned to be built by Macchi as Series 3, which replaced the 7.7mm machine guns with 20mm cannons, but only 77 of these were completed before the armistice. Meanwhile, the development and test flights of the more advanced MC.205N variants were underway. The first prototype was finished in late 1942 and featured longer wings with increased wing area and a redesigned longer rear fuselage for better aerodynamics. The MC.205V variant maintained the dimensions of the earlier MC.202, with 8.85 meters length and 10.58 meters wingspan, and a wing area of 16.8 square meters. But the newer MC.205N was about half a meter longer at 9.33 meters, and its wingspan grew to 11.25 meters, increasing the wing area to 19 square meters. The first N1 model flew in November, and it also featured a much heavier armament than earlier Italian fighters, a 20mm cannon firing through the propeller, and 4 12.7mm machine guns, 2 in the engine cowling and 2 in the wing roots. The second prototype made its maiden flight in May 1943, and it carried a different armament compared to the first one. It kept the center-mounted 20mm cannon, but instead of the 4 machine guns only featured 2 and received 2 additional 20mm cannons in the wings. Though the heavier armament was a welcomed addition, the weight of the fighters increased by almost 200 kilograms on the N1 variant and close to 400 kilograms on the N2 compared to the original MC.205V, making their flight characteristics somewhat worse than the lighter variants. From the N variant, 1,200 were ordered initially, but the contract was cancelled in the spring of 1943, as the Regia Aeronautica didn't have enough resources to manufacture multiple different fighters, and they opted for the Fiat G.50 instead. The MC.205 was the original prototype, modified from the MC.202 version. The MC.205V was the main production variant, keeping the main features and armament of the MC.202. The MC.205N was the revised high-altitude variant of the MC.205 design, with longer wingspan, redesigned tail section, and increased armament. The N1 featured 1 20mm cannon and 4 12.7mm machine guns, while the N2 variant was armed with 3 20mm cannons and 2 12.7mm machine guns. The Macchi MC.205V had a length of 8.85 meters and a wingspan of 10.58 meters. It had an empty weight of 2,581 kilograms and a maximum takeoff weight of 3,408 kilograms. The plane was powered by a single Fiat R81050 RC58 engine, the license-built variant of the Daimler DB605, developing 1,500 horsepower. The fighter could reach a top speed of 642 km an hour and a cruise speed of 400 km an hour. It had a range of 950 km and a service ceiling of 11,500 meters. The plane's armament consisted of 2 12.7mm machine guns and 2 7.7mm machine guns on early models. On the later variants, the 7.7mm machine guns were changed for 2 20mm cannons. As we mentioned, the MC.205 entered service in less than a year after its maiden flight. But that was already too late, as Italy was already under immense pressure by the Allies. Despite this, the type saw extensive combat, and very soon proved itself to be one of the best Italian fighters of the war. One of the first units to receive the MC.205 was the 1st Land Fighter Wing, which was based in Sicily. The unit saw a lot of combat against Allied bombers and fighters, and the Macchi fighter quickly proved itself. The plane's excellent performance and handling characteristics made it a favorite amongst Italian pilots. It was often used to escort Italian and German bombers on missions against Allied targets, and protect convoys over the Mediterranean. The performance of the type quickly impressed the Allied pilots too. During and after World War II, many expressed their views about the Macchi fighter. Amongst them was Captain Eric Brown, chief naval test pilot, who simply called it one of the finest aircraft he ever flew, the perfect combination of Italian styling and German engineering. Despite the success in combat, the MC.205 was produced in relatively small numbers. This was caused mainly because of the industrial situation in Italy, and also because the aircraft was complex and expensive to produce. Following the Italian armistice in September 1943, some of these fighters made it to the hands of the ANR in the north, and continued to fly missions against the Allies. Macchi produced the last 72 aircraft during this time, before the Allied bombings destroyed the factory. In the south, a small number of MC.205s were also used by the ACI, but mostly for training purposes, although some did see limited combat against German forces. The production of the type was restarted after World War II, and the newly formed Italian Air Force received several newly built MC.205s until 1948. During this time, Egypt and Syria also ordered from the type, and the Egyptian planes seen combat in the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. In the 1950s, as the new jet fighters appeared, the type was quickly phased out from service, most of them retired by 1951. Though this aircraft was developed during a hard time in Italy, and it had a short service life in World War II, it still managed to leave its mark as one of the best Italian fighters, by combining a great Italian airframe with a powerful German engine, to be a match for any Allied fighter in the sky. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.